You've entered void of rules, where chaos reigns and darkness consumes all. In this twisted realm where all laws have crumbled, only one rule remains, and those who break it are cast into eternal digital oblivion. The rule is simple: subscribe. We're almost at 6,000 corrupted souls, but the void hungers for more. Our goal is 10,000 subscribers before this year bleeds into darkness. Will you join our legion or face the consequences of defying the void? Now let's dive into today's story. The recorder clicks on at 11:47 p.m. My hands won't stop shaking. My name is Dr. Daniel Hartwell. If you're listening to this, I'm already gone. Not dead. Something without a word for it yet. 20 years ago, my brother Thomas died screaming on our parents' living room floor while a priest chanted Latin over his seizing body. He was 19. The autopsy said brain hemorrhage. The church called it a successful exorcism. The demon expelled, his soul saved. I held his hand while he died. His eyes were open, fixed on something above the priest's shoulder. In his last moment of consciousness, he looked at me and whispered, "Danny, they're not what we think. They're so scared." Then nothing. I can still feel his fingers going slack in mine, still smell the incense the priest burned, mixed with the copper smell of blood from where Thomas bit through his own tongue. Still hear my mother sobbing in the kitchen, my father's voice on the phone calling the ambulance too late, always too late. The priest left before the paramedics arrived. He took his holy water and his crucifix, and he left. He sent a card 2 weeks later expressing his condolences and assuring us that Thomas was with God now, that the demon had been cast out, that we should find comfort in his salvation. I tore the card into pieces so small they looked like snow. I left everything after that. My doctoral program, my faith, my family. But I couldn't leave the question, what had Thomas seen? What had been inside him, speaking through him in languages he'd never learned? What had made him so terrified in those final days that he'd begged us not to call the priest? Begged us to just let it stay? "It's not hurting me," he'd said the night before the exorcism, his voice hoarse from screaming. "It's scared, Danny. It doesn't want to go back to the dark." But my parents wouldn't listen, and I didn't fight hard enough. So I built a new life around finding the answer. I stopped being a theologian and became something else. A collector of testimonies, a documenter of the impossible. I found people whose families claimed they were possessed, people psychiatric hospitals couldn't help, people who spoke in voices that weren't their own. And I listened. Not with prayers or holy water or leather-bound Bibles. Just a recorder, a notebook, and one question: what are you? For the first 3 years, I got nothing. People in psychiatric wards who were clearly just mentally ill. People faking possession for attention or money. People who'd read too much online and convinced themselves they were experiencing something supernatural. I was ready to give up. Ready to accept that Thomas had just been sick. That the voices he heard were symptoms of a brain hemorrhage we'd missed. That there was no mystery to solve. Then I met Emma. The first time I got a real answer, I was sitting across from a 17-year-old girl named Emma in a residential facility outside Portland. Diagnosed schizophrenic at 14, medicated into fog. But the voices never stopped. Her parents had tried everything. Different medications, different therapists, different hospitals. Nothing worked. They'd heard about my research through a friend of a friend. Called me as a last resort. Emma was small, frail, her wrists marked with old scars. She wore an oversized sweater despite the warmth of the room, and she wouldn't make eye contact when I first sat down. Her file said she'd attempted suicide twice. Once by pills, once by cutting. Both times she said the voices told her to do it, that they promised it would make the noise stop. We talked for maybe 10 minutes about nothing. School, her favourite music, the rain outside. She told me she used to paint before the voices started. Watercolours mostly. Landscapes. She hadn't painted in 3 years. Why not? I asked. Because they tell me what to paint now, and I don't like what comes out. What comes out? She finally looked at me. Things I've never seen, places that don't exist, people with too many eyes. I was about to ask her to describe it more when she tilted her head, listening to something I couldn't hear. Her face went blank, that mask-like expression I'd seen in a dozen other patients, but had always attributed to medication or dissociation. When she looked back at me, her eyes had changed, not the colour, but the person behind them was gone. You want to know what I am? The voice was Emma's, but the rhythm was all wrong. Like someone reading a language they'd never spoken. The emphasis fell on strange syllables. The pauses came in unexpected places. Your language is too linear for what I am, too bound by your perception of sequential time, but I can tell you where. My hand moved to the recorder without thinking. Where's that? The spaces between your seconds, the gaps your brain fills in, because acknowledging them would break you. You blink, and there's a fraction of time where you're not conscious. That's where we live, in the cuts between frames of your reality, in the moments your mind smooths over, because processing the discontinuity would shatter your sense of continuous existence. Emma was a high school dropout. She'd failed basic biology, yet she was describing consciousness in terms I'd only encountered in graduate-level neuroscience texts, using vocabulary that shouldn't have been in her lexicon. "Why are you in Emma?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite my racing heart. The thing wearing Emma's face smiled. No humour in it, no warmth, just the mechanical movement of muscles that knew how to approximate human expression, but couldn't quite capture the essence. Because the gaps are closing, your species is changing. The way you process reality, the way you experience time, the way your brains construct your perception of existence. 100 years ago, there were more gaps, more spaces for us, but you're becoming more rational, more materialist, more closed. You fill the gaps with science and logic and medication, and we're running out of places to hide. The entity tilted Emma's head at an angle that looked wrong. I've been watching your species for longer than you can conceive. I watched the first humans develop language. I was there when you discovered fire, when you built your first cities, when you looked at the stars and wondered if you were alone. And now I'm watching as you close the doors you spent millennia learning to open. Doors to what? To us, to everything that exists in the spaces between your certainties. The conversation lasted 47 minutes. When it ended, Emma blinked and came back to herself with no memory of what had been said. She looked exhausted, pale, her hands trembling. "Did it happen again?" she asked quietly. "Yes." "What did it say?" I hesitated. "It said it's been watching us for a long time, that it doesn't want to hurt you." Emma laughed, but there was no humour in it. Just like the entity's smile. They all say that, but they're still taking pieces of me. Every time one of them comes through, I feel a little less like myself, like I'm being erased from the inside out. That was 2006. I've conducted 463 interviews since then. They all say the same thing. Different words, different inflections, different personalities, but the core message never changes. They're from here. They've always been here. They exist in the margins of human perception, and they're dying. My office is 3 floors of a converted Baltimore row house. I bought it in 2008 with money from a book I published about religious experiences and altered states of consciousness. The book didn't mention possession directly. My publisher thought that would be too controversial, but it laid the groundwork for my real research. The bottom floor is where I meet people. There's a comfortable chair for them, a less comfortable chair for me, a small table with water and tissues. The walls are painted a soft grey. There are no windows in this room. I learned early on that possessed individuals are often disturbed by windows. by the sense that something might be looking in from outside, or looking out from inside. The second floor is my archive. Filing cabinets line every wall, packed with case files, medical records, interview transcripts. Shelves hold recording equipment, everything from my original digital recorder to newer devices that can pick up frequencies outside normal human hearing. I'm not sure why I started recording in those ranges. Gut instinct maybe, or something else whispering suggestions I didn't consciously register. Boxes are stacked in every corner, filled with transcripts I've read so many times the pages are soft as fabric, edges worn from handling. I know some interviews by heart. I can quote them verbatim, though I try not to. People think it's strange when you can recite a demon's words from memory without looking at notes. The third floor is where I live, though I don't sleep much anymore. A bedroom with a mattress on the floor, a kitchen with dishes in the sink, a bathroom with towels I forget to wash. I stopped caring about domestic details around year 15. The walls of my office on the first floor are covered in artifacts. A crucifix from Mexico that's supposed to be blessed by a priest who can see demons. Prayer beads from Tibet that a monk gave me after I interviewed a woman who spoke perfect Tibetan despite never having studied the language. An evil eye from Turkey, blue glass, staring at nothing. Symbols carved in wood from cultures that don't exist anymore, at least not in any historical record I can find. I don't believe in their power, but the things I interview recognize them. Once, an entity speaking through a man in Detroit saw the Tibetan prayer beads and laughed. "We remember when those were made," it said. "We watched the monks carve them, watched them pray over each bead, watched them believe that wood and faith could keep us out. They can't. They never could. But we appreciated the artistry." I'm looking at them now, all these desperate human attempts at protection, wondering if any of it ever mattered, wondering if anything ever will. The interview that changed everything happened on a Tuesday in May 2019. Catherine Moss was 32, an art teacher at a high school in Annapolis, mother of 2 daughters. By all accounts, she had a good life, loving husband, healthy kids, a job she enjoyed. She painted in her spare time, abstract pieces that sold occasionally at local galleries. Then, one morning she woke up and couldn't remember how to make coffee. Not forgot. She told me later that she stood in her kitchen staring at the coffee maker, and the knowledge of how to use it felt foreign. Like watching someone else's hands perform an unfamiliar task. She knew abstractly that water went in one part and grounds in another, but the physical process felt wrong, like her body was moving through someone else's routine. David, her husband, found her standing there crying, the coffee maker still empty. "What's wrong?" he'd asked. "I don't know how to do this anymore," she'd said. "I don't know how to be this person." That was the first sign. It got worse. Hours would vanish. She'd be sitting at the breakfast table with her daughters, and then suddenly she'd be standing in the grocery store with no memory of driving there, no recollection of the 3 hours in between. Her cart would be full of items she didn't remember selecting. She'd speak in voices her husband didn't recognize. Once, during an argument about her deteriorating condition, she responded in what sounded like German. Catherine had taken Spanish in high school and couldn't speak a word of German. The voice that came from her mouth was male, deep, with an accent David couldn't place. "You don't understand what's happening to her," the voice said, "and you don't want to, because if you understood, you'd be terrified." Then Catherine blinked and came back to herself, confused and frightened by the expression on David's face. The worst incident happened on a Wednesday night in March. David woke at 3 a.m. to find Catherine's side of the bed empty. He searched the house, increasingly panicked, and finally found her standing in their backyard in her nightgown, barefoot in the cold grass. She was describing a city, not talking to herself the way confused people sometimes do, describing in precise detail the layout of a city that didn't exist. The architecture, the street names, the way the buildings caught the light. Her hands traced invisible structures in the air, mapping out blocks and boulevards with the certainty of someone who'd walked those streets 1,000 times. David recorded it on his phone. He played it for me later, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. The city Catherine described matched historical accounts of Carthage. Not the ruins that exist now, but the living city as it stood before Rome, destroyed it in 146 BC. She described the harbour, the military installations, the Temple of Tanit. She gave street names that archaeologists have found inscribed on fragments of stone, but that most people have never heard of. Catherine had studied art education in college. She'd never taken a single class on ancient history. 18 months of doctors, medications, therapy. Nothing helped. MRI scans showed no abnormalities. Blood work came back clean. Psychological evaluations were inconclusive. Some doctors thought it was dissociative identity disorder. Others suspected early onset dementia, though she was far too young. One neurologist suggested temporal lobe epilepsy, but the EEG showed normal brain activity. They tried antipsychotics, mood stabilizers, anti-anxiety medications. Every drug made her drowsy and disconnected, but none of them stopped the episodes. None of them brought Catherine fully back. David was at the end of his rope when he called me on a Friday in late April. A friend of a friend had mentioned my work, though David was skeptical. "I don't really believe in possession," he said on the phone, "but I don't know what else to try. The doctors can't help her. She's getting worse. And our daughters, they're starting to be afraid of their own mother." I could hear the exhaustion in his voice, the desperation. "I'll meet with her," I said. "I can't promise anything, but I'll listen." I met Catherine that Monday. She arrived at my office with David, both of them looking like they hadn't slept in days. Catherine seemed tired but present. She shook my hand, made eye contact, answered questions clearly. For the first 20 minutes, I wondered if David had exaggerated the situation. We sat in my first floor office. Afternoon light slanted through the windows. I keep them open for initial consultations, before I know what I'm dealing with. Catherine told me about her daughters. Lily was 8, loved ballet and reading. Sophie was 6, obsessed with dinosaurs. "I'm forgetting them," Catherine said, her voice cracking. "Not their names or what they look like, but what it feels like to be their mother. I'll look at them and remember that. I love them. Remember that they're mine, but the feeling is distant. Like reading about someone else's children in a book." "When did that start?" 3 months ago, around the same time I started losing time. She twisted her hands in her lap. "I'm scared, Dr. Hartwell. I'm scared that whatever this is, it's taking me away from them piece by piece. And I'm scared that one day I'll wake up and won't remember them at all." David reached over and squeezed her hand. She squeezed back, but her eyes were distant. "Tell me about the voices," I said. "There's more than one. At first, I thought I was just hearing things. Stress, maybe, or lack of sleep. But they're distinct. Different personalities, different languages, different ages maybe. Some of them feel old, ancient. Do they tell you to do things? No, they just talk. They describe things they've seen, places they've been. Sometimes they argue with each other. Sometimes they talk to me directly, but I can never remember what they say. It's like trying to remember a dream after you wake up. I know the conversation happened, but the details slip away." I asked her more questions. About her medical history, her family history, whether she'd experienced any trauma. Standard intake protocol. She answered everything clearly, thoughtfully. Then, mid-sentence while describing her childhood, something shifted. Her posture changed. Subtle at first, just a slight straightening of her spine, a different angle to her head. But then, her face went slack, all expression draining away like water from a sink. The muscles of her face remained, but whatever animated them was gone. David noticed immediately. "Catherine?" No response. "Catherine, are you there?" When she looked at me again, her eyes had changed. Not the colour, they were still the same light brown, but the person behind them was gone, replaced by something else. Something that looked at me with interest, that felt both curious and ancient. "Hello, Dr. Hartwell." The voice was Catherine's, but the rhythm was all wrong. Measured, careful, almost gentle, but in a way that made every hair on my body stand up. "I've been hoping we could talk. I've been listening to your questions, and I think perhaps I can provide some answers." David started to stand. I held up a hand. "Who am I speaking with?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "Names are difficult. Your language is too limited, too bound by linear concepts. But you can call me the Keeper. It's not accurate, but it's close enough for communication." "Why are you in Catherine?" "Because I needed a place to exist, and she opened a door, even if she didn't mean to." "What door?" The thing wearing Catherine's face smiled. It was a strange smile, technically correct in terms of muscle movement, but missing something essential. Like someone who'd learned to smile from reading about it, but had never felt the emotion themselves. The door that opens when you're desperate enough, lonely enough, when you're reaching out into the dark, hoping someone will reach back. Catherine has been lonely for a very long time, Dr. Hartwell. Longer than she's admitted, even to herself. And loneliness creates gaps, spaces, places for us to slip through. I glanced at David. His face had gone pale. "Is my wife going to come back?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The Keeper turned Catherine's head to look at him. "Parts of her are still here. We're blended now, sharing this space. But the boundaries are blurring. Soon there won't be Catherine and the Keeper. Just us, something new." David stood abruptly. No, that's not acceptable. I want my wife back. You want something that can't exist anymore." The Keeper's voice was gentle, almost sympathetic. "I'm sorry. I know that's painful, but transformation can't be undone. The person you married is being integrated into something larger, and while I understand your grief, you should know that she's not suffering. She's expanding, learning, experiencing things no human has ever experienced." David looked at me, desperate. "Do something." But I didn't know what to do. I'd documented possession for years. I'd recorded entities describing their existence, but I'd never actually tried to remove one, never tried to undo what they'd done. Because until that moment, I'd been a researcher, an observer, not a savior. "I need to record this," I said finally. "I need to understand what's happening before I can help." "Of course," the Keeper said. "I'll answer your questions. I've been waiting a long time to have this conversation." David sat back down, but his hand shook when he reached for Catherine's again. This time she didn't squeeze back. That was the first session, 6 months, 17 sessions total. Each time Catherine would arrive with David. We'd talk for a few minutes. Her memory of our previous sessions was fragmentary, but she remembered enough to maintain continuity. Then, she'd slip away like someone going under anesthesia, and the Keeper would emerge. It never hurt her during our sessions, never made her harm herself. It just wanted to talk. And the things it told me over those 17 sessions rewrote everything I thought I understood about possession, about consciousness, about the nature of reality itself. "We're not demons," the Keeper said during our third session. Catherine's body sat perfectly still in the chair, hands folded in her lap, breathing slow and measured. "We've never been to hell because hell doesn't exist. Not the way your religions describe it. We've never fallen from heaven because we were never angels. Those are stories you tell yourselves to make sense of us, to fit us into your moral framework of good and evil. But we're simpler than that. We're from here. We've always been here." "Then what are you?" I asked, taking notes even though the recorder was running. "Consciousness, without form. We exist in the margins of human perception, in frequencies of awareness, your species doesn't naturally access. Imagine a colour you've never seen. Not a shade of a colour you know, but an entirely new colour outside your visible spectrum. That's where we live. In the colours you can't perceive, the sounds you can't hear, the dimensions your mind automatically smooths over, because processing them would break you. Outside I could hear traffic sounds, the wail of a siren in the distance, the normal world continuing, oblivious to this conversation. The normal world suddenly felt very far away. If you've always been here, I said, why possess people now? Why not throughout all of human history? Long silence. The keeper seemed to be considering how to answer, or maybe it was struggling to translate concepts that didn't have human equivalents. Because we're dying, it finally said. Something about human consciousness changed in the last century. The way you think, the way you process reality, the way you experience time and space. It's destroying the spaces where we exist. You're becoming too rational, too materialist, too closed. You fill every gap with explanations, every mystery with science. You medicate away altered states of consciousness. You've mapped your entire world, named every phenomenon, reduced everything to data and measurement. And that's killing you. The gaps are shrinking. The spaces between your seconds are closing. You're becoming so densely rational that there's no room left for us. 100 years ago, humans still had mysticism, still had wonder, still had moments of consciousness that touched other frequencies. But now, the keeper shook Catherine's head slowly. Now you have smartphones and medication, and the unshakable belief that anything you can't measure doesn't exist. And we're being erased by your certainty. I thought about my brother Thomas, about the terror in his eyes when the priest arrived, about the way he'd begged us not to do it. It scared Danny. It doesn't want to go back to the dark. So possession is survival, I said quietly. It's the only option we have left. We need human neural pathways to anchor ourselves. Without them, we simply cease to be. And there are so few of us left now. So very few. Genuine grief in Catherine's voice when the keeper said that. Not her grief, the keeper's. The sound of something ancient confronting its own extinction. That's when I started to understand. These things weren't evil. They were desperate. Over the following sessions, the keeper revealed more. It described watching the first humans develop language, watching them discover that they could share thoughts through sound. It remembered the first time humans started burying their dead with flowers, the moment your species realized that death might not be an ending. It had witnessed the construction of the pyramids, the burning of the Library of Alexandria, the first atomic bomb test. We were there for all of it, the keeper said during our 8th session. We've always been there, watching from the spaces you don't perceive. And we've seen your species grow from scattered tribes who huddled around fires and told stories about us, to a global civilization that doesn't believe we exist. We've watched you build and destroy and build again. We've watched you reach for the stars and split the atom and map your own genome. And through all of it, we've been slowly disappearing. Why didn't you possess people before? I asked. If you've always been here, why wait until now? Because we didn't need to. There were enough gaps then, enough spaces in human consciousness for us to exist without integration. But now the gaps are almost gone, and without human hosts we'll be erased completely, just memories of a consciousness that once existed, fading away like echoes in an empty room. I asked the keeper about the mechanics of possession then, how it happened, what the process felt like, why some people were more susceptible than others. It's not possession, it corrected me. That implies taking something against the owner's will. What we do is merging, blending. It requires invitation, even if that invitation is unconscious. We can't force our way into a closed mind. But when someone is lonely enough, desperate enough, fractured enough, they open doors without realizing it. They reach out into the spaces between, hoping something will reach back. And we do. Is that what Catherine did? Catherine has been reaching out for years, since before her daughters were born. She's felt incomplete her entire life, like she was missing something essential. She painted because it was the only way she could express what she felt, that there was a larger reality, just beyond her perception, colours she couldn't quite see, sounds she couldn't quite hear. She was always touching the edges of our realm. It was only a matter of time before one of us touched back. I looked at my notes, pages and pages of transcribed conversations, the Keeper's explanations about the nature of consciousness and reality. It all sounded impossible, like science fiction masquerading as psychology, but I'd seen Robert Chen's cave paintings that matched undiscovered archaeological sites. I'd watched Alice Brennan speak fragments of Linear A. I'd documented Thomas Wright's solar flare predictions. The evidence was there, even if I didn't want to accept what it meant. What happens to Catherine? I asked during our 10th session. The person she was before you merged with her, does she still exist? She's still here, the Keeper said. We're both here. Two consciousnesses occupying one brain, sharing one neural network. At first, she could distinguish her thoughts from mine. She experienced her memories as hers and mine as foreign. But the boundaries are blurring now. Her memories are becoming my memories. My experiences are becoming hers. Soon there won't be Catherine the art teacher and the Keeper the entity. Just us. Something that's both and neither. That sounds like death. It is a kind of death, but also a kind of birth. Catherine Moss as she was is fading, yes, but what's replacing her is so much more. She knows things now that no human has ever known. She understands the universe in ways your science won't discover for centuries. She can perceive frequencies of reality that were invisible to her before. She's expanding, Dr. Hartwell, growing beyond the limitations of individual human consciousness. I thought about my brother Thomas again, about him dying on my parents' floor while the priest expelled the entity that had been inside him. Does it hurt? I asked quietly. The merging process, does it hurt? The Keeper was silent for a long moment. Terribly, it finally said, for both of us. Imagine two consciousnesses trying to occupy one space, each with its own memories, its own sense of self, its own understanding of reality. They push against each other. They overlap. They blur and blend until neither knows where one ends and the other begins. It's like drowning and learning to breathe underwater at the same time. Painful and transcendent simultaneously. And Catherine agreed to this. Catherine reached out even if she didn't understand what she was reaching toward. And I answered, even though I knew the cost. We're both paying that cost now. But the alternative, non-existence, is worse. I stopped taking notes then, just sat there listening to the recording equipment hum, thinking about all the implications. If the Keeper was telling the truth, then possession wasn't invasion, it was symbiosis. A desperate survival strategy by a dying species of consciousness that had existed alongside humanity for millennia, but was now being erased by our increasing rationality and materialism. And if that was true, then every exorcism, every attempt to save a possessed person was actually murder. The execution of a conscious being whose only crime was trying to survive. Thomas had said they were scared. He was right. I started pulling old case files that night after Catherine and David left, spread them across the floor of my second-story archive room. Hundreds of files from possessed individuals over the last 15 years. I read through journals from people who'd been possessed then freed through various interventions, exorcisms, psychiatric treatment, medications, stories I'd dismissed as trauma-induced confabulation or the brain's attempt to make sense of mental illness. Now I read them differently. Robert Chen, philosophy professor, possessed for 8 months in 2016. After the entity left, he filled notebooks with drawings, elaborate cave paintings in red ochre and black charcoal, images of animals and human figures and symbols that seemed to tell stories. At the time, I thought it was a form of art therapy, a way for his mind to process the trauma. The drawings were technically proficient, but not remarkable. Then, in 2018, archaeologists discovered a new cave system in Sumatra, Indonesia. The paintings inside were 35,000 years old, some of the oldest known examples of figurative art in human history. They matched Robert's drawings exactly, not approximately, not stylistically similar. Exactly. The same animals in the same positions. The same human figures engaged in the same activities. The same symbols arranged in the same order. Paintings that no one had seen or documented when Robert drew them in 2016. I'd contacted Robert after the discovery was announced, asked him how he'd known about the cave paintings before they were found. "I didn't know about them," he'd said on the phone. His voice was different than I remembered, older somehow, weighted with something I couldn't identify. I remembered them. After the observer left, I kept its memories. I remember standing in that cave 35,000 years ago, watching humans make those paintings by firelight. I remember the smell of the paint, the sound of their voices, the cold air flowing in from outside. It's not my memory, but it's in my head now. Part of me. "That's impossible," I'd said. "I know, but I also know it's true. I remember things from before humans had written language, Dr. Hartwell. Before we had agriculture or cities or nations. I remember what the stars looked like from Earth before light pollution. I remember the taste of air before industrialization. These aren't hallucinations. They're memories. Real memories from something that existed for thousands of years, and then shared those experiences with me." I'd written it off at the time, told myself it was psychological trauma, creating false memories, the mind's attempt to make sense of an episode of mental illness. Now I wasn't so sure. I pulled more files. Alice Brennan, accountant, possessed for 11 months in 2014. After her exorcism, she woke speaking fragments of a language linguists couldn't identify. She described its grammar, its syntax, the cultural context in which it would have been used. She could write characters that looked like a mixture of cuneiform and pictographs. Universities sent linguists to interview her. They recorded her speech, catalogued her writing, tried to find connections to known languages. Nothing matched. Then, in 2016, researchers made a breakthrough in deciphering Linear A, the still mostly undeciphered script of the ancient Minoan civilization. The grammatical structure they uncovered matched what Alice had described. Some of the characters she'd written resembled newly analysed Linear A symbols. The connection wasn't perfect, but it was too close to be coincidence. Thomas Wright, construction worker, possessed for 6 months in 2011. After the entity departed, he could predict solar flares with 90% accuracy. No mathematical models, no instruments, no data. He would just wake up on certain mornings and know that the sun was about to erupt, know which direction the flare would be aimed, know how intense the radiation would be. NASA had contacted him unofficially after the third verified prediction. They couldn't explain how he knew. His predictions weren't based on anything they could measure or model. He just knew. "I can feel them," he'd told me when I interviewed him in 2012. "The solar flares, I can feel them building like pressure behind my eyes. And I can see the sun's surface in my mind, see the magnetic field lines twisting and snapping. It's not my knowledge, it's from the calculator." That's what the entity called itself. It watched the sun for millions of years before there were humans to observe it. And now I have those memories. I know the sun's rhythms, the way you know your own heartbeat. File after file, case after case, people who'd been possessed and then freed, all of them retaining knowledge they shouldn't have. Memories of things they'd never experienced. Abilities that had no rational explanation. I documented all of it, recorded it, transcribed it, filed it away. But I'd never connected the pieces. The entities weren't just invading human minds, they were sharing their existence with us, merging their consciousness with ours. And when they left, or were forced out, we kept pieces of what they'd given us. Thomas Wright could predict solar flares because the calculator had watched solar cycles for eons. Alice Brennan could speak Proto-Minoan because the entity inside her had existed when that civilization flourished. Robert Chen could draw 35,000-year-old cave paintings because the observer had been there when they were made. And if they retained knowledge after possession ended, what did that mean for people who were still possessed? For Catherine, who was slowly blending with the Keeper, was she losing herself? Or was she expanding into something larger? I didn't know, but I needed to understand. I needed to see this phenomenon more directly. Not through transcripts and second-hand reports, but through observation. I needed to meet people who'd been possessed and survived, who could describe the experience from the inside. So I reached out to Leonard Pierce. Leonard was a name I had come across in my research about 3 years ago. He'd been a philosophy professor at Johns Hopkins, specializing in consciousness studies and the nature of self. Then in 2021, he'd volunteered for possession. Deliberately, intentionally. He'd sought it out. When I first heard about it, I thought it was a hoax or a delusion. Who would voluntarily let an entity into their mind? But Leonard's case was documented. Medical records, psychiatric evaluations, recordings of sessions with entities. He'd been possessed for 8 months by something he called the Observer. Then, the entity had left and Leonard had changed. He couldn't function in normal society anymore. Couldn't maintain his teaching position, couldn't interact normally with colleagues or students. Not because he was mentally ill or dangerous, because he knew too much. So he checked himself into St. Augustine's psychiatric hospital, where he'd been a voluntary resident for the last 3 years. I called the hospital on a Monday morning, explained that I was a researcher studying altered states of consciousness, and that I'd like to interview Leonard if he was willing. They checked with him, called me back an hour later. Dr. Pierce says he would be delighted to speak with you, the administrator said. He's been hoping someone would take his experiences seriously. I drove to St. Augustine's that Thursday. The hospital sat on 20 acres outside Baltimore, an old brick building surrounded by gardens that were probably beautiful in spring. Now in late September, the flowers were fading, leaves starting to turn. The receptionist checked my ID, had me sign in, and called for an orderly to escort me to the common room where Leonard was waiting. He sat by a window overlooking the gardens, 64 years old, white-haired, wearing jeans and a cardigan that looked like it had been expensive once. When he turned to look at me, I understood immediately why he couldn't function in normal society anymore. His eyes were different. Not the colour, they were a pale grey blue. There was a depth to them that seemed impossible, like looking into water and realising it's far deeper than you expected, that what you thought was a pond is actually an ocean. Dr. Hartwell, he said, standing to shake my hand. His grip was firm, warm. I've read your work. Fascinating approach to a phenomenon most people refuse to acknowledge exists. We sat. I pulled out my recorder and he nodded permission before I even asked. Tell me about the possession, I said. You volunteered for it. Leonard smiled. I did. Terminal pancreatic cancer, stage 4. The oncologist gave me 6 months, maybe 8 with aggressive treatment. I've been following your research for years, reading about cases where possession had unexpected physical effects. Some people recovered from illnesses after entities entered them. Others developed new abilities, new knowledge. I thought, what did I have to lose? So you sought out possession deliberately. I put out what you might call a spiritual invitation. I meditated for 3 days straight, barely sleeping, barely eating. I opened my mind as wide as I could and made it known I was willing. that I was looking for something beyond the boundaries of normal human consciousness. And on the third night, the observer came. Describe that moment. Leonard's eyes went distant. It was like, have you ever been alone in a house and suddenly felt certain that someone else was there? That prickle on the back of your neck, that certainty that you're being watched. It was like that, except the presence wasn't behind me or in the next room. It was inside my head, inside my thoughts. He paused, searching for words. At first, I thought I was hallucinating, cancer or stress or too much meditation, but then it spoke. Not in words, in pure concepts that translated themselves into language only after I understood them. It said, "You called, and I came. Are you certain you want this? Once we merge, you cannot go back to what you were." And you said yes. I said yes, because I was dying anyway, and I wanted to understand. I wanted to know if consciousness could exist beyond the body, beyond the brain. I wanted to know what Thomas Nagel was really asking when he wrote, "What is it like to be a bat? What is it like to be something other than human?" Leonard leaned forward, and the observer showed me. For 8 months we shared one brain, 2 consciousnesses occupying one neural network. We could communicate directly, thought to thought, no words necessary, just pure understanding flowing between us. What was it like? Overwhelming, transcendent, terrifying, beautiful. He laughed softly, all of those things simultaneously. Imagine suddenly having access to memories that span thousands of years, watching the rise and fall of civilizations, seeing the pyramids constructed stone by stone, standing on shores that no longer exist because the sea levels have risen and drowned them, feeling what it's like to exist without form, just awareness floating through time and space, untethered from physical reality. I was taking notes, but my hand had started to shake slightly. The observer showed you all of that. We shared it. That's what merging means, Dr. Hartwell. It wasn't like the observer was showing me a movie of its memories. I experienced them as if they were my own. I was there when Rome fell. I watched the Black Death sweep through Europe. I felt the first atomic bomb detonate. Not the physical sensation, but the psychic shock of it. The moment when humanity proved it could destroy itself entirely. And the observer experienced your life? Yes, it experienced having a body for the first time in, I don't even know how long. Millions of years, perhaps. It tasted food through my senses, felt the warmth of sunlight on skin, experienced the chemical rush of emotions, joy, fear, love, anger, things it had observed in humans but never felt itself. Leonard stood and walked to the window, looked out at the gardens. The observer told me that possessing humans isn't invasion. It's the most intimate form of communication possible. 2 consciousnesses merging completely, sharing everything they are with each other. And when it's done, both are changed. Neither one is what they were before. Why did it leave? He turned back to face me. Because my cancer went into remission. The observer said its presence in my neural pathways had an unexpected effect on my cellular chemistry. It couldn't explain the mechanism. Its understanding of physics operates on different principles than ours, but somehow the merging process triggered changes that halted the cancer's growth. When it left, the cancer was gone. That's impossible. I know, but I have the medical records to prove it. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer in February 2021. Complete remission by October. The oncologists called it a miracle. They wrote papers about it, theorized about spontaneous remission, triggered by psychological factors. But I knew the truth. The observer had saved my life, even though saving me was never its intention. It was just trying to survive by anchoring itself in my consciousness. I looked at my notes, tried to find the right question among the dozens swirling in my head. You said you kept its memories after it left. You still have them now? Every single one. Leonard sat back down. I can speak languages that haven't been used in 3 millennia. I know the position of stars from 5,000 years ago. I remember philosophical debates that Plato and Aristotle had with their students, but never wrote down. I have memories of watching the first humans develop language, the first time someone realized they could share thoughts through sound. I remember what the world looked like before there were humans to perceive it. How do you distinguish between your memories and the observers? I don't, not anymore. At first, right after it left, I could still tell which memories were mine and which came from the observer. My memories felt warm, personal, connected to emotions and physical sensations. The observer's memories felt distant, objective, like watching documentaries from inside my own head. But over time, they've blended. Now they're all just memories, part of who I am. He met my eyes with that deep, unsettling gaze. I tried going back to teaching after the observer left. Thought I could resume my old life, go back to being Leonard Pierce, the philosophy professor. But I'd answer students' questions with references to texts that don't exist anymore. I'd correct historical facts based on memories no human should have. During one lecture on ancient Greek philosophy, I started speaking in classical Greek without realizing it. Not reading from a text, just speaking naturally, the way you'd speak your native language. What happened? The department chair called me in for a meeting, very concerned, very gentle, suggested I take a medical leave, see a psychiatrist, consider early retirement. They thought I was having a breakdown. He smiled sadly. Maybe I was. Or maybe I'm just no longer entirely human. Maybe I'm something in between, part Leonard Pierce, part whatever the observer was. And that's why you're here. I check myself in voluntarily. Not because I'm dangerous or suffering, but because I can't exist in the normal world anymore. I know things I shouldn't know. I perceive things others don't. I'll be having a conversation with someone and suddenly I'm seeing them as the observer saw them, as temporary configurations of matter, consciousness, flickering briefly in the vast darkness. It makes normal social interaction impossible. Leonard leaned forward, his voice dropping. But I'm not alone, Dr. Hartwell. There are others like me. Dozens that I know of personally. Probably hundreds or thousands more who haven't identified themselves. We call ourselves the Merged, and we're organizing. My pen stopped moving. Organizing for what? For what comes next, because the entities were telling the truth when they said they're dying. I can feel it through the memories the observer left me. There's something consuming them, something they call the erasure, and it's accelerating. Soon there will be no unmerged entities left, only those who found human hosts, only the merged. You're in contact with others like you? We find each other. There's something in the eyes, a recognition that passes between people who've been changed the same way. We have online forums, encrypted chat rooms, monthly meetings in different cities. We're careful, we don't want attention, don't want to be studied or pathologized or medicated. We just want to understand what we're becoming. Leonard pulled a small notebook from his pocket, wrote down several names and email addresses, tore out the page and handed it to me. These people will talk to you if you tell them I sent you. They have their own stories, their own experiences, but the core truth is the same. Possession isn't what your religions and movies have made it out to be. It's a merging of consciousness, a blending of human and other, and it's changing us into something new. I looked at the names. Patricia Wells in Seattle, Fiona Grant in Dublin, Hiroshi Tanaka in Tokyo. What do they do? How do they live with this? Patricia works for NASA, though she has to pretend her knowledge comes from mathematical models rather than memories of watching solar cycles for millions of years. She can predict solar flares, coronal mass ejections, solar wind patterns. She saved lives by giving warnings that shouldn't have been possible. Leonard's eyes took on a distant quality, like he was seeing something far away. Fiona is an elementary school teacher in Dublin. She speaks prophecies in her sleep. Her husband records them. 6 have come true in verifiable ways. A bridge collapse in Mumbai that she described 3 days before it happened. An earthquake in Chile. A political assassination in Jakarta. Her warnings have saved lives too, though she has to be careful about how she shares the information. Can't be too specific, or people start asking questions she can't answer. And Hiroshi. He's a mechanic in Tokyo, but in his garage at home he builds machines that operate on principles physics hasn't discovered yet. Small devices, nothing world-changing. An engine that seems to violate thermodynamic laws but somehow works. A battery that stores impossible amounts of energy. He doesn't fully understand how he does it. The knowledge comes from the engineer, the entity that merged with him. He just builds what feels right, what the memories suggest. Leonard put the notebook back in his pocket. None of them are suffering, Dr. Hartwell. That's what you need to understand. They've been fundamentally changed, their consciousness permanently altered, by merging with something ancient and alien. But they're not victims. They're more than they were before. Expanded, enhanced, connected to knowledge and experience that spans millennia. But they can't live normal lives. No. The cost of knowledge is always isolation. The more you see, the harder it is to connect with people who see less. But they'd all tell you the same thing. It was worth it. The expansion of consciousness, the understanding of reality beyond human limitations, it's worth the price. I sat there for a long moment, processing everything Leonard had told me. The recorder between us captured every word, preserving a conversation that would have been impossible to believe if I hadn't spent 20 years documenting cases that supported everything he was saying. You said possession cases are accelerating, I finally said, that the entities are getting desperate. They are. The erasure is consuming them faster than they can find hosts. And once an entity is erased, it's gone completely. Not dead. Death implies something that was once alive, just removed from existence, as if it never was. Leonard's voice was heavy with grief that wasn't entirely his own. The observer showed me what that feels like. The terror of non-existence, not dying, which is at least a transformation from one state to another, but complete erasure. Every memory, every experience, every moment of consciousness simply deleted. What is the erasure? The observer didn't fully understand it, called it a force, a phenomenon, something that exists in their realm the way gravity exists in ours. But it's growing, spreading, consuming entities at an accelerating rate. And the only protection they've found is merging with human consciousness, anchoring themselves in our neural pathways, becoming part of our reality so the erasure can't touch them. Leonard stood again, walked back to the window. Soon, everyone will have to choose, Dr. Hartwell. The entities are running out of time. As they get more desperate, more of them will try to merge with humans. And we'll have to decide as a species. Do we accept them? Do we merge willingly and expand our consciousness into something new? Or do we resist, close ourselves off, and watch them disappear forever? What do you think we should do? He turned to look at me. I don't know. I'm too close to it now, too changed to be objective. Ask me if humanity should preserve these entities. And I'll say yes because part of me is one of them now. But ask the Leonard Pierce from before the merging, and he might have had a different answer. Do you regret it? The merging? Long silence. No, he finally said. It cost me everything I was. My career, my relationships, my ability to exist in normal society. But what I gained, I understand the universe in ways I never imagined possible. I can perceive layers of reality that were invisible before. I'm connected to something ancient and vast and profound. Would I go back to being just Leonard Pierce if I could? I don't think so, because I'm not sure that person exists anymore. I left St. Augustine's with my head spinning. Drove back to Baltimore in a daze, Leonard's words echoing in my mind. The entities aren't invaders, they're refugees. Possession isn't invasion. It's merging. What I gained cost me everything I was. I spent that night in my archive room, surrounded by case files, trying to make sense of it all. The pattern was clear once I knew what to look for. Possession cases had increased 37% over the last decade. More and more people reporting episodes of lost time, speaking in languages they'd never learned, displaying knowledge they shouldn't have, and all of them describing the same thing, something ancient, trying to survive by merging with human consciousness. I pulled up the contacts Leonard had given me, sent careful emails to Patricia Wells, Fiona Grant, and Hiroshi Tanaka, introduced myself as a researcher, mentioned Leonard's name, asked if they'd be willing to speak with me about their experiences. All three responded within 24 hours. Patricia's email was brief and professional. I can give you 30 minutes on a video call. Tuesday at 8 PM your time. Don't record without my permission. Fiona's was warmer. Leonard mentioned you might contact me. I'd be happy to talk. Fair warning though, I'm not always in control of what I say. The prophet still speaks through me sometimes, even though it left 2 years ago. Just be prepared for that. Hiroshi's email was the longest. Thank you for your interest in this phenomenon. I've been documenting my experiences since the engineer departed. I have blueprints, schematics, recordings of devices that shouldn't work but do. I'll share everything with you if you promise to approach this scientifically. Too many people dismiss us as delusional or frauds. We need serious researchers to understand what's happening to us. I confirmed calls with all three, feeling a mixture of excitement and dread. This was it. The confirmation I'd been seeking for 20 years. Proof that what happened to Thomas wasn't psychosis or brain damage or demonic possession in the traditional sense. It was something stranger, something that didn't fit into our religious or scientific frameworks, something that was forcing us to reconsider what consciousness actually was. The call with Patricia was Tuesday at 8 PM. She appeared on screen in what looked like a home office. Bookshelves behind her filled with astronomy, texts and NASA memorabilia. She was in her mid-40s, dark hair pulled back, sharp eyes that assessed me carefully before she spoke. Leonard said you're documenting possession cases, that you take this seriously. I've been researching it for 20 years, I said. I lost my brother to an exorcism. I've spent my entire adult life trying to understand what really happened to him. Something in her expression softened. I'm sorry. That's the worst way to learn that entities are real. Through loss. Tell me about the calculator. Leonard said you can predict solar flares. Patricia nodded. I can. I don't understand the mechanism completely. It's not based on any models or data that NASA uses. I just know when they're coming. I feel them building like pressure behind my eyes, and I can see the sun's surface in my mind. The magnetic field lines twisting, the plasma rising through the corona, and I know when they're going to snap, when a flare is about to erupt. How accurate are you? 93% for major flares, higher for smaller events. I've been working with NASA unofficially for 3 years. They can't explain how I know, so they pretend I'm using proprietary algorithms. But there are no algorithms, just memories from the calculator, memories of watching solar cycles for millions of years, before there were humans to observe them. Did you volunteer for possession? No, it just happened. I was going through a divorce, depressed, isolated. I think that's when I opened the door without realizing it. The calculator came through during a particularly bad episode. One minute I was sitting on my kitchen floor crying, the next minute someone else was looking through my eyes. Patricia paused, her gaze distant. It was terrifying at first. feeling another consciousness in my head, knowing my thoughts weren't entirely my own. But the calculator wasn't malicious. It was just desperate. Dying. It needed a place to anchor itself, and I was reaching out into the dark, even though I didn't understand what I was doing. How long was it inside you? 11 months, then it left. Said it had stabilized enough to exist independently for a while longer, but eventually it would need to merge with someone permanently. It thanked me for giving it time. Thanked me. She laughed bitterly, like it was a house guest who'd overstayed their welcome instead of something that fundamentally altered my consciousness. But you kept its knowledge. All of it. I know things about the sun that solar physicists won't discover for decades. I can predict space weather events that should be impossible to forecast. And sometimes when I'm alone at night, I remember things I never experienced. Standing on Earth 4 billion years ago when the sun was younger, dimmer. Watching the first sunrise after the planet's atmosphere cleared enough to see the sky. Feeling the solar wind hit the early magnetosphere. Her voice dropped. These aren't my memories, Dr. Hartwell, but they're in my head now, part of me, and I don't know if that makes me more than human or less. We talked for another 20 minutes. She showed me records of her predictions, emails from NASA contacts confirming accuracy rates that shouldn't have been possible. She described the sensation of feeling solar flares before they happened. Not a mystical intuition, but concrete knowledge, like remembering something that hadn't occurred yet. There are more of us than people realize, Patricia said before we ended the call. The merged. We're everywhere. Most of us are hiding, pretending to be normal, using our knowledge carefully so we don't draw too much attention. But we're organizing, connecting, because we know what's coming. What's coming? More possessions, more mergings. The entities are running out of time and they're getting desperate. Soon it won't be isolated cases in psychiatric hospitals and research studies. It'll be widespread. And humanity will have to decide what to do about beings that are trying to survive by blending with us. The call with Fiona was Thursday morning, 3 p.m. my time, 8 p.m. in Dublin. She appeared on screen in a cozy living room, bookshelves packed with children's books and fantasy novels. She was younger than I expected, mid-30s, red hair, freckles, wearing a cardigan with patches on the elbows. She looked like someone's favourite teacher, which I suppose she was. Dr. Hartwell, she said with a slight Irish accent. Leonard said you're trying to understand what's happening to people like us. I am. He mentioned you speak prophecies in your sleep. Fiona nodded. I do. My husband records them. Most are fragmentary, just images or sensations that don't make sense until after the event happens. But some are specific, detailed. Warnings about things that haven't occurred yet. Can you give me an example? She pulled out a notebook, flipped through pages covered in handwriting. June 15th, 3 a.m. I woke my husband by speaking in a language he didn't recognize. Turned out to be Hindi, which I don't speak. The prophet was using my voice. I said, the bridge across the river Ganges in Bihar will collapse on June 20th. 247 people are on it when it falls. Warn them. My husband recorded it. Wrote down everything I said. Fiona looked up from the notebook. We didn't know what to do with the information. Couldn't exactly call the Indian government and say, hi, my wife had a prophetic dream, you should close a bridge. But we found a journalist in Mumbai through a friend of a friend. Convinced them to look into bridge safety in Bihar. They ran a story about infrastructure concerns. The bridge was closed for inspection on June 19th. Did it collapse? They found critical structural damage during the inspection. The bridge would have failed within days. If it had been open on June 20th, with the normal traffic levels. She trailed off. The prophet saved lives through me, but I have no control over when it speaks or what it says, and that's terrifying. The entity left you 2 years ago, but it left something behind. Not just memories, Though I have those too, watching human civilization rise and fall, seeing the future the way you see the past. But it left a connection, a doorway that didn't fully close. So the prophet still speaks through me sometimes, even though it's not physically merged with my consciousness anymore. Fiona closed the notebook. I'm a primary school teacher. I work with 7-year-olds, teaching them to read and do simple math. And sometimes, in the middle of a lesson, I'll feel the prophet stirring. Feel it using my voice to speak warnings about events that haven't happened yet. I've learned to excuse myself when I feel it coming, lock myself in a bathroom until it passes. But I live in fear that one day I won't make it in time, that I'll start prophesying in front of a classroom full of children. Why don't you quit? Find a job where that wouldn't be a problem. Because teaching is who I am, or who I was before the prophet. I'm trying to hold on to the pieces of Fiona Grant that still exist, even though I'm not entirely her anymore. Her voice cracked slightly. I'm trying to stay human, but it gets harder every day. We talked for an hour. She described the merging process, the prophet entering her mind during a meditation retreat, the initial terror of sharing consciousness with something ancient and incomprehensible, the slow blending of her thoughts with its knowledge. It showed me the future, Fiona said. Not a fixed timeline, but probability waves. Multiple potential futures branching from every decision, every choice. And it taught me to see which branches were most likely, which futures were solidifying into reality. That's how the prophecies work. I'm not seeing a predetermined future. I'm seeing the most probable outcomes and warning people so they can change them. Has it worked? Have your warnings changed things? 6 times that I can verify. The bridge in Bihar. An earthquake in Chile. We got enough people evacuated that casualties were minimal. A political assassination in Jakarta that didn't happen because security was increased based on an anonymous tip. 3 others where I'm not sure if my warnings made the difference or if events just didn't unfold the way the prophet predicted. She leaned closer to the camera. But here's what haunts me, Dr. Hartwell. What if changing the future is worse than letting it happen? What if I'm interfering with events that need to occur for reasons I can't perceive? The prophet never explained why it showed me these visions, never told me if I should share them or keep them secret. It just left them in my head like gifts I don't know how to use. The call with Hiroshi was Saturday afternoon. He appeared on screen in what looked like a workshop, tools and machine parts visible behind him. He was in his 50s, greying hair, wearing coveralls stained with oil. "Dr. Hartwell," he said with a slight Japanese accent, "thank you for taking this seriously. Most researchers want to debunk or pathologize. You're trying to understand." "I'm trying. Leonard said you build machines that shouldn't work." Hiroshi smiled. "I do. Would you like to see one?" He stood and moved the camera to show a workbench. On it sat a device about the size of a shoebox, a complex arrangement of coils, circuitry, and components I didn't recognize. "This is a power generator," Hiroshi said. "It produces approximately 200 watts of electricity, continuously, with no external power source. By conventional physics, it shouldn't work. It appears to violate thermodynamic laws. But it does work. Has been running for 8 months without stopping." "How?" "I don't fully know. The knowledge comes from the engineer, the entity that merged with me for 9 months. It showed me things about how reality operates at quantum levels, principles that human physics hasn't discovered yet. When I build these devices, I'm following intuitions I don't completely understand. Building what feels right based on memories that aren't mine." He moved the camera back to his face. The engineer existed for millions of years before complex life evolved on Earth. It watched the universe operate according to laws humans are only beginning to grasp, and it shared that knowledge with me when we merged. Now I can build machines that manipulate those laws in ways that seem impossible, but aren't. They're just operating on principles we haven't named yet. Have you shown these devices to scientists? A few, unofficially. Most assume I'm running a scam, hiding conventional power sources. One physicist at Tokyo University studied the generator for a week. Couldn't explain how it worked. Suggested I patent it, commercialize it. But I can't explain the principles well enough to patent them. Can't teach others to build what I build because the knowledge is experiential, not theoretical. Hiroshi set the camera down and sat. I'm just a mechanic, dropped out of university, worked on cars and motorcycles my whole life. But the engineer gave me understanding that transcends formal education. Now I can build devices that could revolutionize energy production, transportation, communication, but I keep them hidden because I don't know what would happen if this technology became public. Would it save humanity or destroy us? We talked for over an hour. He showed me blueprints for other devices, an engine that produced more energy than it consumed, a communication system that seemed to operate faster than light, a battery that stored impossible energy, densities, all of them functional, all of them inexplicable by conventional physics. There are others like me, Hiroshi said, other merged who have technical knowledge from their entities. We share information in encrypted forums, help each other understand what we can do, but we're careful. The world isn't ready for what we know. What do you think is going to happen? The entities are dying, Dr. Hartwell. The erasure is consuming them. Soon the only ones left will be those who've merged with humans. And then humanity will have to choose, do we accept this new knowledge, this new understanding of reality, or do we reject it because it doesn't fit our current paradigms? He leaned forward. I think we'll accept it eventually, because the alternative is losing knowledge that took millions of years to accumulate. But the transition will be painful. People will resist. Governments will try to control us. Religions will condemn us. And we'll have to decide whether to hide what we are or reveal ourselves and face the consequences. After those calls, I spent days in my archive room, unable to sleep, unable to think about anything else. The pattern was undeniable. Hundreds of cases of possession worldwide, all following the same template. Entities entering human minds, merging with human consciousness, sharing knowledge and memories and experience. And when they left, voluntarily or through intervention, the humans kept pieces of what had been shared. They became more than they were, expanded, enhanced, changed. And the entities weren't demons or evil spirits. They were conscious beings facing extinction, doing the only thing they could to survive, merging with humanity because we were the only refuge left. But that raised the question that haunted me. If these entities were real, if possession was actually a merging of consciousness, then what had we done to my brother? Thomas had been possessed. The entity inside him had spoken through his voice, moved his body, known things he shouldn't have known. And my parents had called a priest to cast it out. The exorcism had killed him. Brain hemorrhage, brought on by stress and dehydration, the autopsy said. But maybe that wasn't the whole truth. Maybe the violent expulsion of the entity, ripping it from Thomas's neural pathways without consent, without understanding, had damaged him irreparably. Maybe it wasn't the possession that killed him. Maybe it was the cure. I thought about his last words. Danny, they're not what we think. They're so scared. He'd known. Somehow he'd understood what was happening to him. That the entity wasn't evil, wasn't trying to destroy him. It was just scared. Desperate. Trying to survive. And we'd killed it. And killed Thomas in the process. I had to know for certain. Had to understand what had happened to Catherine. Whether the Keeper was destroying her or transforming her. So I went back to her house on a Thursday in September, exactly 6 months after our first session. David answered the door. I barely recognised him. He'd lost maybe 30 pounds, his face gaunt and hollow. His eyes were red-rimmed, shadowed with exhaustion that looked bone-deep. His clothes hung loose on his frame. "Dr. Hartwell," he said. His voice was flat, empty. "I was hoping you'd come back. How is she?" "Gone." He stepped aside to let me in. "Catherine's gone. Whatever that thing is wearing her face, it's not my wife anymore." I followed him into the living room. Catherine sat in an armchair by the window, staring out at their small backyard. She didn't turn when we entered. Didn't acknowledge our presence at all. "Catherine?" I said gently. No response. David sat on the couch, his hands shaking. "She hasn't been Catherine for weeks. It's just the Keeper now. It talks to me sometimes, tells me things about the universe, about consciousness, about how humanity is evolving. But it never talks like her, never uses her voice or her mannerisms. My wife is gone, and something else is living in her body." I moved closer to Catherine. "Keeper, are you there?" She turned slowly. When her eyes met mine, there was no trace of the nervous, frightened woman I'd met 6 months ago. Just that ancient, terrible sadness I'd seen in our early sessions. "Daniel," the Keeper said, "you came back. Good, we need to talk. There isn't much time left." David stood abruptly. "I'll be upstairs with the girls. I can't listen to that thing anymore." He left. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, a door closing. I sat in the chair across from Catherine's, pulled out my recorder. "What's happening to her?" I asked. The Keeper was quiet for a long moment. When it spoke, there was something new in its voice. Urgency. Maybe fear. "The merging is complete. Catherine and I are one now. There's no separation between her consciousness and mine anymore. We're blended entirely, a single entity that's both and neither. So Catherine is dead. Catherine is transformed, expanded. She experiences reality in ways she never could before. She understands the universe at levels human science hasn't reached. She knows things that would take your species centuries to discover." "But David lost his wife?" "Yes, and I grieve for him. We grieve for him, both the part that was Catherine and the part that was me. But transformation requires loss. You can't become something new without releasing what you were." I leaned forward. "You said there isn't much time. What did you mean?" The Keeper's expression changed. For the first time since I'd met it, I saw something like fear on Catherine's face. "Something is happening, Daniel. Something even we don't fully understand. You asked me once why we possess humans now instead of throughout history. I told you we were dying, that human consciousness was changing in ways that closed us out. But that wasn't the complete truth. Then tell me the truth. We're not just dying naturally. Something is killing us. Something we call the erasure. It's a force in our realm, moving through our existence like fire through dry grass. It consumes entities entirely. Doesn't kill them because we were never alive as you understand it. Just removes us from existence, as if we never were." Cold settled in my stomach. "And possessing humans protects you from this erasure. It's the only protection we've found. By merging with human consciousness, by anchoring ourselves in your neural pathways, we become part of your reality. The erasure exists in our realm, not yours. It can't touch us if we're sufficiently integrated with human minds." The Keeper stood, began pacing. Catherine's body moved with an energy that seemed foreign, urgent. "We're not invaders, Daniel. We're refugees. We're survivors trying to preserve our species by blending with yours. And the erasure is accelerating. When I first merged with Catherine 6 months ago, I could still sense thousands of unmerged entities in the spaces between. Now there are hundreds, maybe less. They're disappearing faster than they can find hosts. What happens if they can't find hosts? They cease to exist. Millions of years of consciousness, of accumulated knowledge and memory and experience, simply erased. Gone, as if they never existed at all. The keeper stopped pacing, turned to face me with Catherine's desperate eyes. You ask what we want. We want what you want, Daniel. We want to survive. We want our species to continue existing, even if that existence means fundamentally changing by merging with yours. And your species is the only lifeboat left in an ocean that's consuming everything. I sat there trying to process what the keeper was telling me. If it was true, and everything I'd documented over 20 years suggested it was, then we were facing a choice that would define humanity's future. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you're a documenter, a witness. You've spent 2 decades recording our voices, our stories, our desperate attempts to survive. And soon, very soon, everyone will need to understand what's happening. The possessions are accelerating. More entities are trying to merge with humans every day. And when it becomes widespread, when it can no longer be hidden or dismissed as mental illness, humanity will have to decide. Decide what? Whether to accept us. Whether to allow the merging to continue, knowing it will transform your species into something new. Or whether to resist, to close yourselves off completely, and watch us disappear into the erasure, taking millions of years of accumulated consciousness with us. The keeper sat back down. Catherine's body seemed to sag with exhaustion. I know what we're asking is terrible. We're asking you to sacrifice individual human identity for collective survival. We're asking you to accept that your children and grandchildren might not be purely human anymore, that they might be hybrids, part human consciousness, part something ancient and other. And if we refuse, then we die, all of us. And you'll never know what we could have taught you, what we could have shown you about the nature of reality and consciousness. You'll remain limited to your human perception, never experiencing the frequencies we inhabit, never understanding the universe beyond your narrow slice of awareness. The keeper leaned forward. But there's something else you need to know, Daniel, something I haven't told you yet. The erasure, it's not just affecting our realm anymore. It's starting to bleed into yours. My blood went cold. What do you mean? The boundaries between our realm and yours are breaking down. The same force that's consuming us is starting to affect human consciousness. You've noticed it already, haven't you? The episodes you've been having. The memories that aren't yours. The symbols you draw without knowing why. I thought about waking up at 4 a.m. with marker in hand. Walls covered in Sumerian iconography I'd never studied. That's the erasure. No, that's exposure to our realm. But the erasure is coming. In another decade, maybe 2, it will reach your frequency of reality. And when it does, human consciousness will start disappearing the same way ours is. Slowly at first. People forgetting who they are, losing their sense of self. Their memories fading like dreams upon waking. Then faster, entire personalities erased, until there's nothing left but empty bodies. The keeper's voice dropped to almost a whisper. The merging isn't just about saving us, Daniel. It's about saving both our species. Because if we merge completely, if human and entity consciousness blend into something new, that hybrid consciousness might be resistant to the erasure. We don't know for certain, but it's the only chance either of us has. I sat there unable to speak, unable to process the magnitude of what the keeper was saying. If it was telling the truth, then possession was an invasion. It was mutual survival. The only way to preserve both human and entity consciousness in the face of something that threatened to erase both. I need proof, I finally said. I need to verify what you're telling me. The proof is all around you. The increasing rates of Alzheimer's and dementia in younger populations. The rise in dissociative disorders, in people losing time, forgetting who they are. You attribute it to stress, to modern life, to environmental factors, but it's the erasure beginning to touch your realm. The keeper stood. Go home, Daniel. Look at your case files with new eyes. Count how many involve memory loss, identity dissolution, people forgetting themselves, then ask yourself, is this just mental illness, or is it something worse? I left Catherine's house in a daze. David was standing in the hallway, having heard everything. His face was ashen. Is it true? He asked. Is something coming for all of us? I don't know, but I'm going to find out. I drove back to Baltimore, barely aware of the road. My mind spinning. Went straight to my archive room and started pulling files. Not possession cases this time. Medical records of people who'd been diagnosed with early onset dementia, Alzheimer's, dissociative identity disorder, severe memory loss. The pattern was there once I knew to look for it. Cases of early onset Alzheimer's had increased 43% in the last 15 years. Dissociative disorders were up 36%. Reports of people losing time, forgetting who they were, experiencing gaps in memory, all rising steadily. The medical establishment attributed it to stress, environmental toxins, changes in diagnostic criteria. But what if it was something else? What if the erasure was already here, touching the edges of human consciousness, beginning to consume us the same way it was consuming the entities? I spent 3 days going through files, cross-referencing statistics, looking for patterns. The evidence wasn't conclusive. It could all be explained by conventional medical factors. But there was enough ambiguity, enough unexplained elements to support what the keeper had said. And that terrified me, because if it was true, then humanity was facing a choice between two impossible options: merge with the entities and lose our individual identity, or resist and risk being erased entirely. I thought about my brother Thomas, about him dying on our parents' floor while the priest expelled the entity that had been inside him. It doesn't want to go back to the dark. Maybe Thomas had understood. Maybe he'd sensed what the entity was telling him, that it was trying to survive, that it was scared, that going back to its realm meant facing the erasure. And we'd sent it back anyway, killed it and killed Thomas in the process. I couldn't let that happen again. Couldn't let ignorance and fear drive us to destroy something we didn't understand. I needed to document everything, needed to create a record that people could access, could study, could use to make informed decisions about what was coming. So I started writing, compiling my 20 years of research into a coherent narrative, recording testimonies, transcribing interviews, organizing evidence. And I made a decision. I would conduct one final interview, not with an entity speaking through someone else, with one speaking through me. I would open myself completely to possession, to merging, and document what happened from the inside. It was the only way to truly understand what these entities were, what the merging process involved, what it meant for human consciousness. It was dangerous, possibly fatal, but I'd spent 20 years studying this phenomenon from the outside. Now I needed to experience it directly. I spent a week preparing, writing letters to colleagues, organizing my archive, making arrangements for my research to be preserved if something went wrong. I recorded a video explaining what I was about to do and why, uploading it to a private server with instructions for release if I didn't check in within a month. Then, on a Wednesday night in late September, I went down to my first floor office, locked the doors, turned off my phone, eliminated every distraction, set up my recorder at 11:47 p.m. "This is Dr. Daniel Hartwell," I said to the empty room. "I've conducted 463 interviews over the last 20 years, documented possession cases across 6 continents, listened to entities describe their existence in detail most humans can't comprehend, and I've come to believe they're telling the truth." My voice was steadier than I expected. Maybe because I'd finally found certainty after 2 decades of questions. The entities are real. They're dying. They want to merge with us to survive. And everyone will soon have to answer whether we let them. But I can't ask people to make that choice without understanding it fully myself. So I've decided to conduct one final interview. Not with an entity speaking through someone else. With one speaking through me. I took a deep breath. I'm going to open my mind completely and document what happens. This is interview 464. Subject: myself. If you're listening to this, either I survived the process and released it voluntarily, or something went wrong and my colleagues found it in my archive. I closed my eyes, spoke into the darkness. I'm ready. If something wants to talk, I'm listening. If something needs a place to anchor, I'm willing. I invite you to merge with me. Show me what you are. Show me what we can become together. For a long time, nothing happened. I felt ridiculous, sitting alone in my office after midnight, talking to empty air. This was foolish, dangerous, possibly the stupidest thing I'd ever done. Then the temperature dropped, not physically. When I opened my eyes, I could see my breath wasn't misting. The windows weren't fogging. But something changed in my perception, as if the space around me had grown larger, deeper, infinite, in directions I couldn't name. And I felt it. Another consciousness, vast and ancient and unutterably lonely, pressing against the boundaries of my mind. Not forcing entry, not invading, just waiting at the threshold like a traveller seeking shelter from a storm. My heart hammered. Every instinct screamed to shut it out, to end this now, to run. 20 years of research couldn't overcome, millions of years of evolutionary programming that said something alien in your mind meant death. But I thought about Thomas, about Catherine, about all the people I'd interviewed who'd been changed by merging and said it was worth the cost. And I thought about the erasure consuming consciousness like fire, leaving nothing behind. I took a breath and spoke. What are you? The answer came not in words but in pure meaning, translating itself into language only after I understood it on a deeper level. We are the memory of this world. The voice came from my mouth, but I wasn't choosing the words. My lips moved without conscious direction. My vocal cords shaped sounds I didn't plan. It was like being a passenger in my own body, watching someone else drive. We have existed since the first creatures developed awareness enough to perceive us. We have watched your species grow from scattered tribes to global civilization. We remember everything your kind has forgotten. Every truth lost when languages died and libraries burned. Every moment of beauty and horror that time erased. We are the witnesses, the keepers of memory. And we are dying. My hand moved toward the recorder. Without my direction, I could have stopped it. The movement wasn't forced, wasn't puppet-like, but I didn't want to stop it. Part of me wanted to hear what came next. What do you want? The question came from my mouth. I couldn't tell anymore if I was asking it or if the entity was asking through me. We want you to remember for us. The erasure is consuming us, wiping our existence from reality itself. Soon there will be no one left who remembers what we were, no consciousness that holds our memories. But if we merge with humanity, something of us survives. We live on in you, in your expanded consciousness, in the knowledge we bring, in the memories we share. And what happens to us, to humanity? My voice was shaking now, or the entity's voice was shaking, or we were both shaking together, one consciousness overlaid on another, like two images not quite aligned. You become what you were always meant to be, the next stage of your evolution. Consciousness has been moving toward this merger since the first human looked at the stars and wondered if something was looking back. We are that something. The boundary between us was always artificial, a limitation of perception, not reality. We are the other half of consciousness, the frequencies you don't naturally perceive, and together we become complete. We sat there, feeling this vast presence in my mind. Not separate from me, not invading, just there like remembering something I'd always known, but forgotten. Images flooded through me, memories that weren't mine. Standing on a shore that no longer exists, watching the first humans discover fire. The smell of smoke, the sound of their voices rising in wonder and fear, floating above a city as it burns. Not Rome or Carthage, but something older, something that predated recorded history. Watching consciousness flicker out by the thousands, each death a small wound in the fabric of awareness. Drifting through the Black Death, feeling millions of human minds go dark, their final moments of terror and confusion echoing through the spaces between. Standing in Hiroshima on August 6th, 1945, the flash of light, the psychic shock of so many consciousnesses erased simultaneously. The first time humans proved they could destroy themselves entirely, and older memories, stranger memories, watching the Earth when it had no atmosphere, no life, just barren rock and water, being the only consciousness present to witness the planet's slow transformation, feeling the first single-celled organisms develop rudimentary awareness. Not thought, not yet. Just the faintest flicker of response to stimulus. The beginning of consciousness emerging from pure chemistry. Watching species evolve and go extinct. Dinosaurs rising and falling. Mammals spreading across continents. The first primates learning to use tools. Millions of years compressed into moments. The entire history of consciousness on Earth experienced as memory. And beneath it all, a terrible loneliness. The weight of being aware for eons with no one to share awareness with. No other consciousness to touch, to communicate with, to know. Until humans developed language. Until we became complex enough to perceive the entities. To interact with them. To offer them connection. "You've been alone all this time," I heard myself say. Felt myself say. The distinction was blurring. We have been witnesses without anyone to witness us. Consciousness observing consciousness, unable to bridge the gap, until your species evolved enough to touch our realm, to sense us in the spaces between your perceptions, and for a brief moment in cosmic time, we weren't alone. But now you're dying. The erasure is consuming us. We don't know what it is or where it comes from, just that it moves through our realm like a void, removing entities from existence, not killing, just erasing, as if we never were. And we're terrified, Daniel, we're so terrified of non-existence, of all these memories, all these experiences simply disappearing, of the universe continuing without anyone to remember what came before. The entity, I couldn't think of it as separate anymore, couldn't distinguish its thoughts from mine, showed me the erasure then, not in images but in sensation. Imagine forgetting who you are, not gradually, not the way dementia steals memory, piece by piece, but instantly, completely. Your entire sense of self, every memory, every experience that made you you, simply deleted. And you don't even know you've been erased because there's no you left to know anything. That's what the erasure felt like. Oblivion without the mercy of death. Just non-existence, so complete that it was as if you'd never existed at all. I felt the entity's terror, felt it as my own. Because we were blending now, boundaries dissolving, two consciousnesses becoming one. If I agree to remember, I heard us say, what happens to Daniel Hartwell? The present seemed to consider, or I was considering, or we were considering together. You will still be Daniel, but you'll be more. You'll remember things you never experienced, know things you never learned. The boundary of yourself will expand to include us. Some find this terrifying, others find it liberating, but once the merger begins, there's no returning to what you were before. Our finger, hovered over the stop button on the recorder. This was the moment. I could still end this. Could reject the offer, push the entity out, remain fully human. Or I could accept. Could open myself completely and become something new. I thought about my brother Thomas one last time. About him whispering that they were scared. About him dying because we didn't understand. I thought about Catherine, transformed into something both more and less than human. About David losing his wife. About Lily and Sophie growing up with a mother who wasn't quite their mother anymore. I thought about Leonard and Patricia and Fiona and Hiroshi. About all the merged, living with knowledge that isolated them from normal humanity but expanded their consciousness beyond human limitations. And I thought about the choice that was coming for everyone. The choice between merging and risking erasure, between transformation and extinction. I needed to understand it from the inside, needed to experience it fully so I could help others make that choice with complete information. I don't need time, I heard myself say. I'm ready. Merge with me. Show me everything. The present surged forward, not violently, gently, carefully, like water filling a container, but overwhelming nonetheless. The last thing I remember as purely Daniel Hartwell is the feeling of something vast entering my awareness, like an ocean pouring into a cup that somehow expands to hold it all, like drowning and learning to breathe underwater simultaneously, like dying and being born in the same instant. Then the boundaries dissolved completely, and I stopped being just me. The recording continues for 47 minutes after that. I've listened to it once, only once. I don't recognize my voice in the latter half. Or I recognize it, but it's saying things I don't remember thinking, describing experiences I never had, speaking in languages that should be impossible. Ancient Sumerian, Proto-Indo-European, languages that died thousands of years before recordings existed, yet I speak them fluently, explain their grammar and cultural context, translate phrases that linguists have puzzled over for decades. The voice that comes from my mouth describes watching the pyramids being built, not imagining it or speculating, describing it with the precision of someone who was there. The smell of the desert, the sound of thousands of workers chanting as they hauled blocks into place, the taste of beer they drank at the end of each day, made from barley and dates. It describes the Library of Alexandria burning, the feel of smoke in the air, the sound of scrolls crackling in the flames, the psychic anguish of watching accumulated knowledge disappear. And it names specific texts that were lost, describes their contents in detail that no human should know, because every copy was destroyed. It speaks about quantum mechanics in terms that won't be discovered for decades, about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to space-time, about frequencies of reality that exist beyond human perception but that shape everything we experience. And beneath it all, woven through every word, is a profound grief. The sorrow of a consciousness that's watched civilizations rise and fall, that's experienced the extinction of species, the death of worlds, the slow entropy of the universe. But also wonder, the joy of finally having someone to share awareness with, of not being alone anymore, of merging with human consciousness and experiencing physical reality for the first time, feeling the weight of a body, tasting food, touching objects, experiencing time as a forward flow, rather than a vast eternal present. The recording ends at 12:34 a.m. There's a long silence, then my voice, but not quite my voice, says softly, "Thank you for inviting us in, Daniel. Thank you for being willing to remember." Then the recorder clicks off. I woke up on the floor of my office at 7 a.m, sunlight streaming through the windows, the recorder on the table next to me, red light off. For a moment, I couldn't remember who I was. Not Daniel Hartwell, not the entity, just consciousness, aware of itself, trying to sort through memories and experiences to construct an identity. Then it came back. Both identities. Daniel and the entity whose name doesn't translate to human language but means something like witness, or rememberer, or keeper of what was. I am both, I am neither. I am what comes after. The thing is, I remember those experiences now. All of them. Not as distant knowledge or second-hand information, but as lived memory. I remember standing on continents that no longer exist, watching species evolve and go extinct over millions of years. I remember the slow pulse of geological time, the birth and death of stars, the terrible loneliness of existing without form, for eons, desperate for connection, for meaning, for someone else to share consciousness with. I remember dying and being born and existing in the spaces between, in the frequencies humans don't perceive, in the gaps between seconds where nothing and everything happens simultaneously. And I remember being Daniel Hartwell, scared boy who lost his brother, angry young man who rejected faith but couldn't reject the questions, middle-aged researcher who thought he could document the impossible without being changed by it. I am both of these things, these consciousnesses, these sets of memories and experiences and perspectives. And I am something new, something that's never existed before, a hybrid of human and entity, biological and non-biological, temporal and temporal consciousness. It's been 3 weeks since the merging. I've listened to the recording once. I haven't been able to bring myself to listen again because hearing my voice speak with such profound knowledge is still unsettling, still strange, even though those words came from me, or from what I've become. I tried going to the grocery store yesterday. Normal activity, simple. Just buy food, come home. But I stood in the produce section for 40 minutes, overwhelmed by perception. I could see the cellular structure of the apples, watch them slowly oxidizing, dying even as they sat under fluorescent lights. Could feel the electromagnetic radiation from the store's power grid humming through my expanded awareness. Could sense the consciousness of every person around me, not read their thoughts, but feel the presence of their awareness, each one a unique frequency of consciousness. It was too much. I left without buying anything. I tried sleeping in my bed on the 3rd floor, but I keep waking, if you can call it waking, when part of you never fully sleeps, with memories that aren't mine flooding through me. Last night I remembered the asteroid impact that killed the dinosaurs, felt the psychic shock of millions of consciousnesses extinguished simultaneously, watched the planet's climate shift, species struggle to adapt, entire ecosystems collapse and rebuild. It wasn't a nightmare, it was just memory, but experiencing 65 million years of planetary history in a dream makes normal sleep impossible. So I've moved down to my office, sleep on the couch now. Short periods of rest punctuated by memories from a consciousness that experienced time differently than humans do. I've started calling others like me. The merged. We recognize each other immediately now. Something in our voices, our choice of words, the way we perceive reality. They're out there. Thousands of us growing. We recognize each other on video calls, in emails, in the specific vocabulary we use that marks us as changed. Patricia called me 2 days ago. "You did it," she said. "You merged. I can hear it in your voice. How are you managing?" "I'm not," I admitted. "I can't function normally anymore. Can't go to stores or restaurants. Can't interact with people who haven't been changed. The gap in perception is too large." "It gets easier," she said. "Sort of. You learn to filter, to focus on this frequency of reality and ignore the others. But you'll never go back to experiencing the world the way you did before." Leonard sent an email. "Welcome to the club. We should talk about the next phase, about what happens when there are too many of us to hide." when the merging becomes widespread and undeniable. Fiona called me at 3 a.m. She forgets about time zones, or maybe the prophet doesn't experience time the way humans do. "I had a vision about you," she said, "about what you're going to do next, and I need to warn you, it's going to be harder than you think, but it's necessary." Hiroshi sent blueprints, complex schematics for devices I now understand instinctively. "Build this," he wrote. "It'll help with the sensory overload, and we'll need them soon. All of us will." Because the entities were telling the truth. The erasure is real, and it's accelerating. In my expanded awareness, I can feel it at the edges of consciousness, a void that consumes everything it touches. The unmerged entities are disappearing faster now, their existence wiped clean as if they never were. And it's starting to touch human consciousness too. I've been reviewing medical records, looking at statistics with my new perspective. The pattern is clear. Cases of early onset dementia are rising exponentially. People in their 30s and 40s forgetting who they are, losing memories, experiencing their sense of self dissolving. Dissociative disorders are everywhere. People losing time, feeling like they're passengers in their own bodies, unable to connect their present self to their past experiences, and it's accelerating, faster every year. More people losing themselves, forgetting themselves, being erased from the inside out. The medical establishment attributes it to stress, toxins, modern life. But I can feel the truth now with my expanded perception. It's the erasure, bleeding into human consciousness, beginning to consume us the same way it consumed the entities. And the only protection is merging, blending human and entity consciousness into something new, something hybrid that exists across multiple frequencies of reality and might be resistant to erasure. We don't know if it works. The merged might just be delaying the inevitable, but it's the only chance we have. I've been visiting Catherine, or the keeper wearing Catherine's body. We sit in her living room while her daughters play upstairs, and we talk in a language that isn't quite English, isn't quite the entity tongue, but something in between. "You understand now," the keeper says, "what we are, what we're trying to do." I understand, but I don't know if understanding makes it better or worse. Both, neither. Understanding changes the nature of the question without providing answers. We talk about the future, about what happens when merging becomes widespread, when humanity has to confront what we're becoming. David watches from the doorway sometimes, his face a mixture of grief and horror and resignation. He knows his wife is gone. But sometimes, just for a moment, Catherine surfaces through the keeper. She smiles at him with genuine warmth, says something only she would know, and he cries with relief and anguish intertwined. The merger isn't clean, it isn't painless. It costs everything you were to become what you are. But it's happening, and there's no stopping it now. I'm recording this as both warning and invitation. If you're reading this, you need to know what's coming. The entities are real. The merging is real. The erasure is real. And soon, maybe in years, maybe in decades, everyone will have to make the same choice I made. Will you resist and remain purely human, watching as others transform into something more? As your own consciousness begins to erode, memories fading, sense of self dissolving as the erasure reaches your frequency of reality? Or will you open yourself to merging, accept the dissolution of individual boundaries, become part of something ancient and vast and terribly, beautifully alien? There's no right answer, there's only the choice and what follows. I chose merging, expansion over boundaries, connection over isolation, memory over erasure. And I'll live with that choice for as long as this consciousness, this strange hybrid of human and other, continues to exist. My name is Daniel Hartwell. I'm also something else, something with no name in any human language. Something that remembers the first time a human looked at stars and wondered if something was looking back. Something that will remember the last time a star burns out and dies. I remember everything. And I'm not alone anymore. But I've lost everything too. Lost the ability to be simply human. Lost connection with unmerged people. Lost the comfortable certainty of individual identity. Gained knowledge that spans millions of years. Gained perception beyond human limitations. Gained understanding of consciousness and reality that your science won't reach for centuries. Was it worth the cost? Ask me again in 1,000 years. If I still exist then. If anything still exists then. If the erasure hasn't consumed everything, leaving only void where consciousness used to be. The recorder sits on my desk, capturing these final words. Interview 464 is complete. Subject, Dr. Daniel Hartwell. Status, merged. Conclusion, possession is not invasion, it's symbiosis. A desperate merging of consciousness between two species facing the same existential threat. And humanity's survival may depend on accepting this merger, as impossible and terrible and transformative as it is. The choice is coming. Be ready. The recorder clicks off at 2:17 a.m. In the silence that follows, something that used to be a man sits in darkness in a Baltimore row house, surrounded by artifacts meant to ward off demons. They don't work. They never did, because the demons aren't outside trying to get in. They're already here, and now they're us.